Welcome everybody to the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology as we are pursuing our study of the impacts of Canada's regulatory structure on small business. We have a full panel with us today, so I will be tight with my time. From Pharmascience, we have David Goodman, Chief Executive Officer, and Alain Boisvert, Head of Government Affairs and Market Access. From Consumer Health Products Canada, we have Karen Proud, President, and Adam Gibson, Vice President, Public Affairs. From Medic, Brian Lewis, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Diana Johnson, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs. And from the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, Bob Masterson, President and Chief Executive Officer. Thank you all very much for coming. You will each group will have 7 minutes to present, and then we'll go into our rounds of questions for the remainder of the 2 hours. So why don't we start with Pharmascience, Mr. Goodman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's a great pleasure that we appear today on behalf of Pharmascience before the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. My name is David Goodman. I am the CEO of Pharmascience. With me is Alain Boisvert, our Head of Government Affairs and Market Access. Before we share with you our recommendations to implore and modernize Canada's health product regulatory system, I'd like to first introduce our company and underline its unique contribution to the Canadian pharmaceutical industry and economy. Pharmascience is a privately owned, entirely Canadian pharmaceutical company founded in 1983 by my father, Morris Goodman, and his partner and fellow pharmacist, Ted Wise, with a goal to offer high-quality, accessible, and affordable pharmaceuticals to Canadians and global citizens. Our headquarters and manufacturing facilities are in the Greater Montreal area. Over time, our growth has been very significant, and we've become the largest pharmaceutical employer in Quebec, all categories confounded, with a workforce exceeding 1,500 employees. Through our affiliated Pharmascience International, we export close to $100 million of high-quality Canadian manufactured pharmaceuticals in over 60 countries. Our exports have been growing above 10% per year for the last few years. Less well known is our contribution to pharmaceutical R&D, but we have invested more than $250 million over the past 5 years in R&D initiatives, which ranks Pharmascience among the top 10 investors in our field in Canada and ranked by Report on Business every year for the last 5 years in the top 100. We employ close to 200 people in our R&D lab in Candiac, Quebec. Pharmascience's R&D contribution goes far beyond product development and formulation. We are currently supporting and sponsoring a major clinical trial in partnership with the Montreal Heart Institute and Dr. Jean-Claude Tardif, its principal investigator. The Colcott trial, which we're involved with, will be a global randomized trial of colchicine, an old agent used in the treatment of gout, in the prevention of morbidity and mortality outcomes related to cardiovascular diseases. This trial generates a great deal of interest in the international cardiology community. It will last 20 years and could shape the prevention and treatment of cardiovascular disease, which remains the #1 cause of human death at the global level. Of significant importance, colchicine is a very affordable drug that would not pose the sort of financial challenges to healthcare budgets that we have become accustomed to with many new specialty drugs. The contribution of the Colcott trial to Canada's healthcare system could be unique. Without Pharmascience's support, this trial could not have been undertaken. It's made possible because both the Montreal Heart Institute and Pharmascience are so deeply rooted in the Montreal community. But what truly distinguishes Pharmascience from almost all other pharmaceutical companies operating in Canada is the fact that we produce and commercialize in Canada and abroad is essentially reinvested here to create wealth and economic growth locally. No other foreign-owned company can offer this sort of contribution to the Canadian economy with all the decision-making authority done locally. This outstanding business contribution to the Canadian economy is completed by our philosophy and of philanthropy. Over $70 million worth of drug products have been donated by Pharmascience through Health Partners International to more than 3 million people in more than 100 countries since 1985. The Goodman Foundation has supported the creation of the Goodman Center for Pediatric Formulation at the CHU Sainte-Justine in Montreal to help support the development of child-friendly formulations of essential drug products. And the foundation is also a major supporter of the Goodman Cancer Center at McGill University and is a major donor at the Université de Montréal Faculty of Pharmacy, where the main agora bears our name. While Pharmascience is considered a large player in the Canadian generic space, we remain a small enterprise at the global level. Yet the future of our company will largely rest on our ability to grow in global markets and to create wealth in our country by exporting high-quality Canadian manufactured pharmaceuticals. It's from this perspective that we'd like to contribute to the works of your committee to bring the perspective of a fully Canadian enterprise. I'd like now to identify a few areas that Pharmascience views as needing significant regulatory modernization and improvement for small Canadian business involved domestically and globally in the pharmaceutical field. First, we speak about Health Canada's regulatory role is essential, and we are the first ones to recognize it. Health Canada has also pledged as a fair regulator to apply equal standards to all manufacturing facilities, domestic or foreign, and we have no doubt about its intents to do so. But our perception is that it has in fact been difficult to maintain an equal playing field between Canadian and foreign facilities regarding compliance audits. This can have a very significant competitive impacts on Canadian manufacturers who, because of their greater accessibility, are under direct control by Health Canada, whereas foreign facilities are certified indirectly through foreign regulators. It's in this context difficult to fully harmonize application of the standards. Our experience is that this has played against Canadian manufacturers, such as Pharmascience, a situation that can greatly hurt our competitiveness and ability to create growth and wealth and reinvest it locally. We would ask that this matter be addressed jointly with Health Canada. Submission fees are also now charged systematically to Canadian manufacturers of pharmaceutical products seeking a regulatory authorization to commercialize products. These fees can be substantial and are applied with a one-size-fits-all approach aimed at ensuring procedural fairness. The fee structure does not distinguish enough between large, small, and very small enterprises, and it's not adapted to potential market size and anticipated product revenues. Consequently, submission fees can be a disproportionate barrier to the decision to bring a new product or formulations that would fulfill important healthcare needs. The best example of that is of the pediatric formulations. Pediatricians in Canada have complained for more than 30 years that critical drugs they need to prescribe in infants or children are not available in child-friendly formulations and need to be compounded by pharmacists or parents before they are administered to children. Many of these products are available in other international markets. However, manufacturers are de-incentivized to bring such pediatric formulations to market in Canada. Most of the time, drugs are off-patent and the cost of developing a new formulation would be impossible to recover in small, low-price markets such as those existing in pediatrics. A solution would be to waive submission fees for pediatric formulations. Such an exception would perfectly be consistent with the public health objective to enhance the availability of child-friendly formulations. We need to have this discussion with Health Canada. Successful development of pediatric formulations will also require a specific pricing grid from the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance and federal and provincial drug pricing negotiation bodies where the federal plans are represented. International harmonization is also a major goal of agencies such as Health Canada, and there are many and there exist many trusted regulators with whom it could be possible without impeding on public protection. Yet, we continue to experience multiple examples of Canada-only product standards, such as specifications, in-process testing standards, which make efficient production and market supply difficult when not outright impossible. We must remember that Canada only represents 1 to 2% of the global pharmaceutical market. A greater collaboration effort to align with trusted regulators is essential. The list of topics could be longer, but to foster a useful discussion with members of the committee, we'll limit ourselves to the above. In closing, and before addressing members' questions, I wish to reiterate our gratefulness for the opportunity to share our suggestions with the committee and to assure you of Pharmascience's commitment to cooperate with Canadian governments, federal and provincial and territorial, in the pursuit of our common objectives of local economic growth and wealth creation in the healthcare field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to Consumer Health Products of Canada. Karen Proud.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Karen Proud. I'm the President of Consumer Health Products Canada. I'm joined at the table by my colleague, Adam Gibson, our newly minted Vice President of Public Affairs, who's been with the association for about a month. In our previous lives, however, Adam and I have both worked as regulators at Health Canada. I left Health Canada over 10 years ago, but Adam's departure from the public service was much more recent. His last job with Health Canada, he was the Director General of the Natural and Non-Prescription Health Products Directorate. So between the two of us, we have about 25 years' experience regulating the very sector we now represent. So just a little bit about Consumer Health Products Canada. We are the trade association that represents the companies that make evidence-based natural health products and over-the-counter medicines. These are things from sunscreens to vitamins to allergy medicines. It's what Canadians have in their medicine cabinets to treat their minor ailments every day. Within our membership, we have a wide range of members, from the very biggest manufacturers to small companies trying to make a go of their business in Canada. In fact, my colleagues to the left are members of CHP Canada. So I'm really pleased to be here today to share our experiences and thoughts regarding this important study, and I really want to thank the committee for the opportunity to present. I'd also like to offer our support to the witnesses that you heard on Tuesday from both the Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. You heard a lot about red tape and administrative burden from those witnesses, and we are fully aligned with what they had presented to you on Tuesday. So we'd therefore like to offer input in some additional areas of the regulatory system and won't touch on those that were already very well represented by those witnesses. So at CHP Canada, we are advocates for the necessary benefits of regulations. Our industry has long recognized the positive role that regulations play to ensure market fairness, consumer safety, and investor confidence. We have been around for well over 100 years and have witnessed the additive impact of new regulations over time and the resulting challenges faced by our members, and in particular of the small businesses. We faced these challenges in the past by remaining engaged with government. For example, we applaud the recent rounds of regulatory modernization that have been undertaken by the Treasury Board Secretariat. The renewed Cabinet Directive and the supporting suite of policy tools published last September represent a real step forward, and when applied by departments, will have a significant impact on businesses both large and small. And my experience over the years has been that Treasury Board has not frequently consulted with stakeholders outside of government on these types of policies, and really should be congratulated for the work that they've done and the consultations that they had that helped contribute to the development of these new policies. That said, we have not seen a consistent application of these sorts of policies in the past. Staying engaged with government has also become increasingly difficult, especially for small businesses. And I hope to provide some insights from the point of view of our sector as to how we may improve the situation. So I've broken the presentation up into a few theme areas that we'd like to raise for your consideration. One relates to regulatory competency and capacity. One of the greatest challenges we have seen over the years relates to achieving a shared understanding between industry and the regulator of how the industry actually functions. Essentially, a well-informed regulator is one who will propose and ratify the most effective laws. However, the value of understanding industry is influenced by public service attitudes, management changes, perceived and real conflicts of interest, as well as resources. At CHP Canada, we have taken it upon ourselves to offer education to our Health Canada regulators about how our industry works, and we have an ongoing program where we provide access to our member experts at least twice a year to explain how our business functions. And while our education efforts have been very well supported by the Health Canada officials, the challenge is that this form of industry comprehension is voluntary and is not a prerequisite to becoming a lawmaker. A lack of comprehension of small business factors only compounds these concerns. The policies I mentioned earlier from the Treasury Board would help address issues through improved consultation. However, as I said, we have not seen their consistent application over the years. As a result, we believe more rigorous application of Treasury Board policies, as well as sector education within regulatory bodies, are partial solutions that are already before us. I also want to speak briefly about the volume of regulations and the planning for input into regulations. There's always a challenge for both associations and for government to effectively engage small businesses. They're busy. Because they have fewer staff performing multiple roles, they may often find themselves learning about issues as they face them, as opposed to being part of the consultative process in shaping those regulations. The environment inherently puts small business at a disadvantage during regulatory consultations that may impact their operations. They're always at risk of not being represented and appearing, therefore, complacent or in agreement with regulatory proposals when their voices are not heard. Just as an example, in order to stay engaged over the last 4 months, small businesses in our sector would have had to have participated in 24 different regulatory-related consultations coming out of Health Canada alone. Almost half of those were only shared with industry associations, some requiring as little as 10 days to respond. But many small businesses are not even members of industry associations, don't benefit from the input that we provide, and their voices are not heard. While not all of these consultations that I mentioned introduce new burdens, the sheer volume, timelines, and communication practices mean that in many cases there's neither the ability nor the time to engage small businesses. Now, I don't want to suggest that the government stop consulting with industry or that the pace of the necessary changes be slowed. We support the vast majority of what our regulators are working on and really greatly appreciate the opportunities and the efforts to engage with us. But we'd simply encourage government to tailor their engagement activity to small businesses. I know I've run a little bit over time. I'll just touch very quickly on one last point, which has been raised by the witnesses on Tuesday with regards to the lack of an economic mandate. And we would just like to confirm and support the commitment in the fall economic statement requiring regulators to look at things like economic competitiveness. And we're very happy to see that the government was looking to explore legislation that would include regulatory efficiency and economic growth as an integral part of regulators' mandates. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank the committee again for the opportunity to appear. We believe Canada has a great opportunity to lead the world in our regulatory approaches for small business and see this study as an important part of that effort. And I'll be happy to talk in more detail about the efforts that we are undertaking, including some research that we're currently involved in to look at the economic impact and competitiveness of our sector in Canada.
Thank you very much. And I would actually encourage you to submit a brief which has everything that you weren't able to get through today. That would be good. That applies to everybody, of course. Now from MEDDIC, we have Brian Lewis, President and Chief Executive Officer. You have 7 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much. Diana, Diana and I both represent MEDIC, which is the trade association representing medical technology industry in Canada, which includes surgical equipment, pacemakers, in vitro diagnostic blood tests, and medical imaging equipment. So that's the breadth of our membership. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background in terms of the environment for small technology businesses. I've got a slide deck that has come up now. What we know is that jurisdictions that have robust technology business ecosystems have efficient regulatory processes and health system adoption practices that enable timely adoption of medical technology solutions that improve patient outcomes. So we absolutely need that sort of situation to occur in Canada. Access to the Canadian marketplace is very complicated. There have traditionally been licensing hurdles to overcome at the federal level and procurement issues at the provincial level. The other thing to remember, and it's been stated by some of the other witnesses around the room, human and financial resources are very limited. Some companies have fewer than 10 employees, so it's important that we look at red tape and the amount of burden that we have in terms of processes to actually be able to enable these businesses better. What we would like to do is just quickly go through in the 7 minutes some of the licensing hurdles that exist out there, including authorization timelines and slow or unpredictable regulatory approval times for medical technologies. The fact of unique Canadian requirements where we have global harmonization efforts, which we applaud, absolutely should be done, but they should not introduce Canada-specific requirements. Implementation should be harmonized as much as possible. The auditing process, which is very important for safety, the need for recognition of small business capacity and for red tape reduction of multiple short-term audits. And what we're talking about there is duplicative audits within a short time frame. We need to actually release the burden on the small Canadian businesses. Difficult clinical trials framework for devices. Conducting clinical trials is important, and it's a real draw for business and an important aspect for business. And then novel and digital technologies. So what we're going to do next is go through each of these very quickly and actually talk about also what Health Canada has been putting into place to try that for about the last year, we've noted that Health Canada's consultations have increased dramatically, and the amount of work that has been going on by Health Canada to try and improve the situation has increased, and there has been progress. But what you're going to see here is it important that it continues, that the work done to date is appreciated and it's been well accepted by small Canadian businesses, but it must continue. So for authorization timelines, that's the approval of your product. Slower, unpredictable regulatory approval times for medical technologies is a disincentive for those particular companies. Excuse me just for a second while I get to it. I just want to, and the companies that are either wanting to launch products in Canada, that are wanting to export products, or wanting to invest in R&D. It's really a high degree of importance that this regulatory approval here occurs in Canada. One of the great things is that Health Canada has been addressing those processes, like I mentioned earlier, to meet the target timelines. So they've been developing the process. They've also been providing training and new guidance documents. We've had something called NDSAP, where we had over 100, close to 200 companies participating in Health Canada training. So that situation could get better. But it's really important, as I said earlier, that this continues because it's just starting. Unique Canada requirements. So like mentioned earlier, we were dealing with the process of global harmonization, which is key if you're exporting for Canada. As mentioned earlier, if Canada is only 1 or 2% of the world, our Canadian headquartered organizations have to be able to export, and global harmonization is key of regulatory to reduce that burden, and we play an active role, and Health Canada plays an active role in these particular processes. It is key, but no harmonization effort should introduce Canada-specific requirements. Harmonization with global initiatives such as those taken with the IMDRF, which is the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, must be maintained, they must go on. The challenge with these is that at present the need for regulators to implement the agreed processes across the board. And what we mean is all countries doing it at the same time. Because of a recent example that's highlighted here is the implementation of Medical Devices Single Audit Program with only Canada mandating its use. So MDSAP can be used with the 4 other authorities, but they have not been mandated. And it's really important that we maintain that degree of harmonization. Health Canada did react well to the input provided by the auditing organizations and industry, but to ease the burden on manufacturers. But going forward in the future, it'd be good if we were more harmonized. Increased audit burden, I mentioned it earlier. Scheduling multiple audits within short time frames is inefficient for small business. For example, small Canadian companies have reported to us undergoing an extensive medical device single audit, followed approximately 3 months later with a Health Canada MDEL audit, a large drain on their resources. And so we have to, and the audits are essentially very similar in process, so we have to realize that the impact of that red tape when conducting audits in the future. Clinical trial is a very important element we were talking about earlier. Canada needs to stay competitive with the rest of the world, and we need to change the process regarding ITAs or investigational testing authorizations to future-proof the regulations and bring innovation to Canada. At this time, Canadian startup companies are being forced to go outside Canada for studies on low-risk products for timely adoption. This has huge impacts on small businesses. Health Canada tried to address this by coming up with guidance to facilitate the process, but however, unfortunately, that guidance had the opposite effect. It doubled the review time, and the bureaucracy required by the investigator is significantly more. Now, we know Health Canada has an action plan to continue, and we look forward to them addressing this particular issue. Novel technologies, a new approach to the Canadian approval and adoption of innovative medical technologies would enable growth for the sector and deliver better patient outcomes. Health Canada has already begun to focus on this area with the creation of the new Digital Health Division within the Medical Devices Bureau and the creation of a new Standing Scientific Advisory Committee. So current efforts by Health Canada is that division. There's more work that's required there. And something for the regulatory review of drugs and devices is an early pre-submission scientific advice discussions with the manufacturers during the development stage of innovative products. We've received very positive comments from Canadian headquartered organizations because what happens is you get to go and talk to the regulator about how you should improve your submission, what information will be required to make the submission more efficient, and it allows the regulator to see what types of capability they'll need inside to conduct that review. So that's been very positive. Final thoughts, as we move into these areas of novel products and digital, Health Canada should focus more on developing guidance documents rather than regulations because there's going to be a lot of change management in the regs as they develop them, and guidance documents are easier to revise than regulations, so they should stay on top of it, and wherever they can, put out guidance rather than regs. Continue to drive global harmonization and implementation, and always consider an additional burden when introducing new initiatives to look to reduce that audit burden. And I just wanted to say we made prior submissions. So again, as stated at the beginning, the biggest thing, Health Canada is moving forward, and I think if your committee can actually put forward a plan so they continue to be resourced in order to go forward, I think we'll end up very shortly in a much better situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, from the Chemical Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, Bob Masterson, and you have 7-ish minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I will be brief. Canada's $55 billion a year chemistry industry is a significant contributor to the economy. We're also a fast-growing industry, and many would not know it, but we have added $10 billion in new chemistry investments in Canada announced during the past year alone. Nevertheless, and to be perfectly frank, we do believe Canada has a very serious problem with regulatory competitiveness. And according to the World Economic Forum, Canada ranks 14th out of all OECD countries in its overall competitiveness, but 38th out of 40 when it comes to the overall burden of government regulation. So just imagine how far up the rankings we could move in our overall competitiveness if we can tackle this chronic issue of regulatory undercompetitiveness. So what are our major concerns as a regulated community? Well, let's start with the serious levels of overlap and duplication across all levels of government, all jurisdictions. Add to that rushed out, poorly thought out regulations that very rarely ever take into account the regulated entity's willingness to achieve the policy objectives, but in a manner that will allow them to do so in a least cost manner. We don't get that opportunity often enough. And then there's the uncertainty and timeliness issues that we've heard about. Obtaining an approval in Canada generally takes an average of 249 days. That's double the OECD average, and that's triple the amount of time required in the United States. In short, we see a regulatory system that's multi-layered across departments and jurisdictions without clear authorities, and which often results in delays, administrative burdens, unnecessary costs to both government and business, not just business alone. We're often asked in fora like this to identify just the one thing. What's the one thing we can do better that will address this issue of regulatory competitiveness? And I would encourage this committee to forego simplistic solutions. You don't get to be a poor performer in any field by doing just one thing wrong. If you're at the bottom of the heap, there's a lot of things you're doing wrong, and you need to make systematic changes. This issue of regulatory competitiveness, to quote the Deputy Minister in Ontario, it's a chronic disease with a heavy economic drag across the whole country. So while the regulatory burdens do cross multiple jurisdictions, we are here today to share our concerns specifically with the federal regulatory regime. We are also very, very pleased to see that our concerns are shared. In his fall economic statement, Minister Morneau did identify regulatory competitiveness as a key concern and did announce a number of measures to address it. Those measures did include the recent cabinet directive on regulation, and that's welcome. But I would suggest that there will be no meaningful improvement at all whatsoever unless the central agencies drive adherence to that directive with the same zeal and timeliness that they drove government renewal and program review efforts more than 2 decades ago. And presently, we see absolutely no sign of this on a day-to-day basis. I might also note, and perhaps this is most important of all, that that directive is completely silent on the question of jurisdictional issues within Canada, and unlike program review, poses no challenge for federal entities to consider the extent to which the issue in question is or should be the responsibility of our provincial governments and territories. The Smart Regulation Initiative of 2004-2005 offered a much more critical examination of the needs and benefits of cross-jurisdictional regulatory cooperation. As jurisdictional overlap and duplication is so prominent, perhaps the perennial and most important issue of all, this is an area in need of further urgent attention within that directive. In my remaining minute, let me just point to you 2 examples of what, in our view, are actually very good practice examples of regulatory effort within the federal government. They've both avoided many of the shortcomings that plague the regulatory competitiveness issues in the system more broadly. So within Health Canada and Environment Canada, the development and implementation of the Chemicals Management Plan, first launched in 2006, has been a welcome exception. It's a complex program, it is difficult, but they've done a very good job in managing the competitiveness aspects. The program remains on track to achieve all its objectives and is being emulated by other jurisdictions across the world. Likewise, Transport Canada's multifaceted approach to better managing the risks associated with transportation of dangerous goods is also a complex policy and regulatory effort which has been remarkably well delivered. So I'd encourage you to invite representatives of those programs to your committee to share their perspectives on why their regulatory initiatives are working so well when most of the others are simply not. Finally, the province of Ontario has also started important efforts in this area, and a comprehensive red tape challenge process was initiated by the previous government, and the recommendations out of that are being delivered by the current government. And Deputy Minister Giles Gerson has been at the helm of that exercise throughout, and he too would make an excellent witness to this study. The Deputy Minister is guided by a vision of eliminating those regulations that add cost to business and government, but which do not add any benefit to the province or its citizens. I'll just conclude by saying the study being undertaken by this committee is most welcome and, in our view, urgently overdue. And I encourage you to be honest and frank about Canada's regulatory competitiveness problems and to be just as broad and creative in your recommendations for addressing it. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspectives with you, and I certainly look forward to your questions.
Thank you all for presenting to us today. We're going to jump right into our lines of questions, with starting with Mr. Bayless. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with you, Mr. Goodman. But all of you have touched on the same topic, which is none of you are against the regulator, but there's that balance between the regulator and innovation and the regulator and overburdening companies, and specifically small companies. And if that balance is lost, we're actually hurting. We're not actually helping Canadian consumers and our citizens. We're actually making it worse for them. You brought up the example of the pediatric formulation, which is near and dear to my heart. Could you expand a bit on that challenge that you're having there to bring drugs into the country that are formulated for children, and not just saying to parents, take an adult pill, cut it up, crunch it, and try and make it work for your child? If you could elaborate on that, please.
Certainly. The problem with pediatric formulations is exactly as you said. Products are not formulated for children. And I think the real problem in Canada has been many of these products that are formulated for children, they may not be the optimal, but they're improvements over the crushing, are available in many other markets in the world. And for different economic reasons, the brand companies have never introduced them into Canada. So one of the initiatives that we supported at the request of the CHU Sainte-Justine was to make some of these products available to Canadians. And since one of the things we discovered was Health Canada was treating many of these products that were 20 years old, had approved indications in children, they were treating them almost like they were new products, that they were products that they'd never heard of. And secondarily, they were assessing fees on them to bring them to market that were almost at the same cost as new chemical entities. So we started into this initiative to think, how could we make pediatric formulations more and bring innovation to them? And we started off with the lowest level of innovation by just introducing things that were available elsewhere and seeing how the market would accept it. And we found this huge barrier to getting even those products to market. And so really, where did Health Canada hurt us? Well, Health Canada helped us by paying attention to us. Health Canada listened to the issues, but their regulations, as we were told, forced them to charge us fees that made the development of these products really uneconomic. Secondarily, Health Canada followed their rules about looking at health and safety, but they did not look at as many of us on the panel have spoken, they had not looked at as well at the foreign regulatory bodies who have looked at this. They have access to those communications, yet they insisted on things being redeveloped here, which became another burden. We have, the center has done a pan-Canadian study of all the children's hospitals across Canada. They are all suffering from the same issue of inaccessibility to products. The alternatives to compounded products are well known to be inferior and have potential safety issues. Yet, and there's a will, but the regulations do not permit the fast adoption of these products.
If I may add, Mr. Chairman, I think that the pediatric example is a perfect one of a regulatory problem that has become chronic. I'm a pharmacist by training, and I was trained as a hospital pharmacist at St. Justin Hospital in the 1970s. And already the problem was in existence. And very little has evolved since the past 30 years because of the reasons that Mr. Goodman has mentioned. Regulatory barriers, lack of consideration for the economics of introducing child-friendly formulations, and presence of heavy...
Thank you on that. Appreciate it. I'm going to move to you, Mr. Lewis, because it did touch on something there about harmonization, but then you made an example where harmonization, which is supposed to help our companies, and specifically our Canadian companies, went awry. I'm talking about MDSAP, where Canada worked with other jurisdictions to harmonize a process to market, but then became the only one to mandate it. And to my understanding, that's had a very negative impact. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you. I'll take that question if I may. Yes, one of the things with the MDSAP audit was it's a great idea. The idea is that one audit could potentially get you approvals from a quality system perspective for 5 different jurisdictions at the same time, thereby reducing the audit burden. However, that only works if all of the countries are really looking for that MDSAP certification. At the moment, Canada is the only one that's insisting on an MDSAP certification. And it takes longer to get your certificate because it has to be, the audit report has to be reviewed by 5 different authorities at the moment. So it's a lot of work for a company to undergo that MDSAP audit if they're really only seeing a benefit in Canada. And as we've heard before, Canada is a relatively small market. If the US had mandated it, Europe still hasn't got to that point yet. If those markets were mandating it, then we wouldn't have had this issue because manufacturers would have seen the benefit and been able to adopt it much more easily and readily.
You also touched on another point about the rate of change, and so the need to introduce innovative changes. So, for example, something needs to be re-regulated that didn't even exist before. You'd mentioned guidance documents as opposed to always the regulator trying to drop it in. Can you elaborate on that?
The difficulty is regulations take a long time to promulgate and actually bring to fruition. And sometimes you really need to be able to adapt to changing circumstances more quickly. With a guidance, you don't have to go through the kind of gazetting process, which automatically makes it a long process. You can still put your guidance out for comment, get feedback, and put it into practice much more quickly. So if you could, for example, in regulations, say, have a content satisfactory to the minister is what the regulation requires, but then in guidance define what that satisfactory evidence would look like. It's easier for people to react and manage.
Thank you. Right. We're going to move on to Mr. Lloyd. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And first off, to Mr. Masterson, I'm just really pleased, when you're talking about new investment in the chemicals industry, that in my constituency, Pembina Pipeline just announced quite a large project and with many jobs. And so I was very pleased about, the contributions of our chemical industry to this country. My question is going to kind of go into the overlapping jurisdictions and issues of internal trade. So we had the Agreement on Internal Trade, which was negotiated in the 90s and updated under the previous government, and now we have the new Canada Free Trade Agreement. And I was wondering if you could comment on, was this agreement able to harmonize some of these overlapping jurisdictions or eliminate them in order to make it easier for the chemicals industry to compete in a regulatory environment in Canada?
No.
Okay.
I mean, our products are freely traded across provincial boundaries, so that's a non-issue.
Okay.
The key issue of regulatory overlap and duplication in large industries, complex industries, absolutely not. There's been no signs. Any positive progress that's been made, jurisdictions like British Columbia, now jurisdictions like Ontario, is entirely homegrown and them looking at their own affairs.
Is it currently a major issue that provinces have their own regulatory regimes?
Well, that's not the issue. I mean, we have a constitution with a division of powers. I think the challenge is that there's a lot of fuzziness, especially in key areas like environmental regulation and transportation regulation. And rather than just pretend that there isn't fuzziness and for each level of government to proceed full steam ahead, maybe they ought to have a conversation. So let me share an example of what has gone well and another recent example that's going less well. For most of the last 8 years, we've had a very comprehensive, multi-stakeholder, federal, provincial process to discuss how to improve the important issue of air quality across Canada. That process, it's been complicated, it's complex, there's going to be a lot of money spent to achieve the objectives, but from day one there's been clarity on what the role of the federal government is and then what the role of the provincial governments is. And yes, it's a complex process, but it's moving very well. We're currently in discussions with Health Canada on a consultation where they're proposing a very significant new role for the federal government, which would involve managing the risks of workplace exposures to different substances. Now, we are committed to continual improvement in managing workplace exposures, but until today, till this consultation started, that's clearly a role for the provincial governments. I could list at length all of the requirements they have. So it's not that we oppose a federal role. Perhaps there's a gap that the federal government needs to fill. But we would only say before they jump into that arena and start to play, perhaps they need to have a discussion with the provinces to really identify what that gap is and then figure out what is the appropriate role for the feds.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. And my next question to Mr. Goodman from PharmaScience is I'm hearing in my constituency, usually from pharmacists in the front lines, they're saying, Canada has less access to drugs today than it did even a few years ago. And they've been critical of some changes to regulations. And I was wondering, could you elaborate? Are you seeing that recent changes to regulations, are they having an impact on Canadians' access to drugs?
Well, I guess there's two types of denial of access. There's drug shortages, which people know all the time. These are products that people are used to taking, and for different reasons, they are not available in the market. And then there's the second part of products that are approved in other markets, and brand companies aren't bringing them into Canada.
Particular reason why these drug shortages are happening, or is it just a supply and demand issue? Is there a regulatory reason, or?
There's a lot of a key part of it is regulatory, and another part is the economic. You know, the prices of these of the generic products have been reduced substantially, and the regulatory burden to support them have gone up enormously. And in the plans that we're hearing from Health Canada, the cost of maintaining products on the market that are already approved is going up substantially. So while the margins are going down, the cost to operate and to keep it are going up. And that's one of those points where I say the big picture is being lost in the cost recovery.
Are you aware if, under the special access program, are you aware if the government has had to engage in the use of the special access program to procure drugs that are in short supply in Canada over the past few years?
We're well aware of that, but most of the special access products are for products that were never registered in Canada. So it's a workaround to get them into the country.
Is that a regulatory problem that you would identify that we're having today, that we have products that we need to use the special access program to access because they're not registered in Canada? Is that a regulatory barrier?
It is a regulatory barrier because the solution to it is to register them. And the cost to register them and the barriers to support that registration are so high that in some ways companies who have these products in other markets say, why should I bother going through this burden when if the patient needs it, they'll import it. These are typically for small market products for small needs. And instead of doing the right thing about registering them, they can do it no one's forcing them to do it. I think a better approach would be look at these needs and have Health Canada say, we want to have these products approved, we want to review them, let's do it the right way, but let's realize these aren't blockbusters, let's not charge a fee. Let's use policy the right way.
So, I mean, from an economics perspective, cost-benefit analysis, would you say that when the government has to engage in these special access requests, is the cost higher to purchase these things because they're not registered? Or if we were to lower the regulatory requirements for registration or the fees, would it actually save the Canadian government money in the long run, you think, because they would have better access to these drugs?
I would say that the bigger issue, if we go to the Canadian consumer is paying a huge price for the special access because he's not getting it reimbursed in his plan. So the consumer is getting killed in these cases. They're getting denied, and if they can get it, it's coming out of their pocket. If it was to be registered, then it becomes a fair game. It gets to be evaluated on its merits, and its pricing gets to be discussed through other mechanisms.
Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Mr. Massey. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. I'm sick right now, so I apologize for my voice, and also I'll try not to cough into the microphone. At any rate, I'm curious about the waiver of fees for pediatrics. It would seem, though, that that would be a reasonable approach, but when the company may be making profits in other divisions, that it wouldn't consider, that's the loss leader for brand development and so forth. Or is it the fees so much so that it just basically makes it non-competitive? I mean, if there's a low market that we have here, despite Ontario being one of the largest, consumer commercial markets in North America compared to many states, just waiving the fees or the regulations would make the difference for putting drugs on the market. And do you have an example of that that we could pull from for the study? That would be really interesting.
Well, if you were to ask me, I now have two products. I submitted 2 products. One got approved. One is still waiting for approval. I'm in discussions with Health Canada about the fees that they're charging. We haven't resolved it, so I prefer not to put that into, to discuss it, but I could say that from a company that has started this from as a service project, because we've also supported from the foundation, the center, and continue to support it. We're taking a step back from doing additional ones because of the experience we have and the pending regulations that are proposed that will make it even more expensive. So Health Canada's created a climate not to do this versus to do it. The pediatric population is an unmet need, but it's small. But these same products there's so many of these unmet needs that are small, and Health Canada puts one price really for every product that they want to register and manage. And they look at, and the new proposed regulations say, if you're a small company, we'll give you a fee reduction. If you're a large one, you get nothing. And we're saying, shouldn't it be more about how well the product sells? Because if somebody's going to keep something that people need, and in the pharma space, we do things that people need. Don't make it so impossible for us to do things as a service.
Yeah, and I understand that. I guess I just have a hard time understanding what drugs for pediatrics are being denied to Canadians right now. That say, I'm on the Windsor-Detroit border, on the corridor there, right? And to me, I know that, and it would be, if we're looking at people having to self-modify their own medications as opposed to a pharmacist, and we're being denied that when Ontario's market economy is much more robust than most U.S. states, it would seem that economic argument isn't always valid. It would seem that maybe perhaps there's other things that might be barriers, maybe packaging or some other type of regulatory burden. I don't know, but especially given the fact that we've done a number of different initiatives since I've been here, of everything from lowering corporate taxes. We've been pushing that. I know this committee in particular, the SHRED tax credit system, which is very, very difficult even to this day. I won't even go there, but it's gotten a little bit better. But I mean, it's been a nightmare for many. But it would just seem that there may be a very much harsh thing is that Canadians are dividing their medications and so forth for pediatrics because companies just can't make a buck here. Is that what's happening, as you're saying?
I think the answer to that is that from the start, the patient populations are very small in pediatrics. These are disease states also that are almost irregularly rare diseases. So the formulation problems happen with drugs that have been on the market for many years, that have become generic, that are now being accessible at a very low price for Canadians. And formulating a pediatric drug requires some additional R&D investment in formulation at the time in the life cycle of the product where this product is no longer profitable. So it's this joint.
If I could just how much for a fee would cost? So what X amount of dollars would that be? So if you're saying that if the fees were waived, the suggestion was to waive the fees on that, how much would that cost? I'm just trying to get a practical, so people are going to be looking at this report.
So let's say the fee.
Sorry to interrupt, and I'll let you finish, Mr. Bouvet.
So the fee that we were proposed to pay for just Health Canada approval was $167,000.
And that's the important evidence that we need to know right there. Yeah.
And sometimes, often, the whole of the Canadian market for these products can be much less than $1 million in all provinces, all jurisdictions. So if just your regulatory fee is $170,000, and then you also have to pay a fee for the Canadian Agency of CADTH, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, to assess the cost effectiveness of the drug. That's another $70,000. INES in Quebec has a fee of about $40,000 to do the exact same thing. So just in fees, you're covering almost half of the market for the drug. And there's development work that has to be put by the company to formulate the product, get it through Health Canada. Adding all of these costs becomes a real barrier.
And none of
you never
that,
know if Health Canada is going to approve it or not. So there's a risk of development.
there's risks too. No, this is very helpful to get to it. And do I have one last quick thing? Once they pass all those hurdles, the hurdles was used, is then that process not any applicable anywhere else other than just Canada in terms of any of our trade agreements or so forth? Is that, so once you've invested in all those fees and stages, are you then able to transfer any of those costs anywhere else?
The fees, no. Every jurisdiction wants their own fees.
Yeah, okay, so that's, this is important. This is
Yeah.
what we're trying to get a distinguishing difference as to walk it right through the entire.
Now, there's no, in the case of the Health Canada, there's no value added
the US.
outside.
It's no good for you in the US.
In fact, a U.S. comparison can be detrimental to Canada because the fees are roughly the same in the U.S. and Canada, except that the market is 10 times smaller here. So the cost of getting the drug to market with this fee structure is disproportionate in Canada.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're going to move to Mr. Sheehan. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our presenters. That was very informative. Karen, you had mentioned you had watched Tuesday's testimony from the Canadian Federation of Small Business and the Chamber of Commerce. And during that time, I had started some questioning, but I didn't get into this one particular question that I would like to propose to you. As you know, I used to work a lot with small businesses, helping them start, but also scale up and grow. And I would like you to comment on the health regulations as it relates for small, medium-sized businesses' ability to scale up, and in particular, raise that necessary capital, because you're in a pretty capital-intense business in the health business. So if you care to comment on that.
I mean, our sector is a highly regulated sector. So, the testimony I heard on Tuesday talked about just running any kind of a business and all the red tape that's involved in that. And that applies to our sector as well, just the red tape involved in running a business and the CRA and all of that. On top of that, our companies also require approvals for products from Health Canada, and depending on whether they're trying to manufacture here or not. There's all sorts of rules around packaging requirements. So it is very difficult for a small company to get a foothold in Canada. And one of the very difficult things as well is with regulations that are not harmonized between Canada and the US in many cases, while they're growing their business here in Canada, it's not easily transferable to growing then globally. So if we have different requirements here that are not recognized elsewhere, we can have a good run at the Canadian environment, but not outside of Canada. If we have, which we do now, very different packaging requirements, for instance, for our products, we have to then look at a completely different approach if we're going into other countries. And certainly in developing the regulations, there is no view to how that affects small business. And I think it's important to make clear, health and safety for our sector is the number one priority, and we fully agree with that, and we think that's highly important. But on top of that, there's no look from Health Canada at the economics of what they do, which is why we were so encouraged to see in the economic update this idea that even the regulators who regulate in the health space would have some responsibility to look at how their regulations affect companies from an economic perspective. Not to say that would trump health and safety, it never should, but it should be a consideration which just doesn't happen in this country. And it's very hard, especially in a highly regulated sector, for any company to start small and grow.
Thank you. And sticking on that then, I'm also on the International Trade Committee, and we're undertaking a study on how small and medium-sized businesses can take advantage of the new trade agreements, CETA, with Europe, and the Comprehensive Progressive Trade Agreement, the former TTP. So you've made a comment about Canada, United States. what about looking at Canada, Europe, Canada, Asia? Could you comment on that, please?
Well, so we're actually doing a study right now, and as I mentioned, with Deloitte. We've just started it looking at Canada's competitiveness, and it's to try and assess where we are in relation to some of the major trading partners. And our study looks at Canada in relation to the United States, in relation to the UK, and in relation to Australia. And specifically looking at the regulatory burden and the return on investment for companies investing in Canada. And while we may have sort of the same kinds of regulations as we do in other countries, the return on investment is very different depending on which country you're in and where some of the incentives are. Some of the trade agreements, as we were inputting into them, we were looking for similar incentives as they had in other countries. So for instance, in the United States, they have 3 years of data protection for consumer health products, not the prescription side, but the consumer health products. We were looking for something similar so our companies here could benefit from that. But in those trade agreements, Canada got the option to opt out of that sort of protection. The same with the EU, where there's a year of protection, but Canada doesn't have that. And I think that's where, if we're sort of looking at how these trade agreements can help, our position was really trying to get the same benefits for Canadian companies as the companies have in other countries, so we can work on an even playing field.
Thank you. And I'd like to turn over my time to the PS for Health, John Oliver. He has a quick question.
Thank you very much. My question is for Brian and Medic. So in December, Health Canada released its action plan on medical devices. It had 3 principal focuses. It in part came out of the concerns that some media had with complications from some devices. So first, and you've commented on it, improving how medical devices get to market, and you did, I think your presentation really hit on that, and the advice that you've given in, and it appears to be heard well by Health Canada. The 2 other areas, though, one was strengthening monitoring and following up, which would include increasing inspection and enforcement by Health Canada regulators. And the third was improving information to Canadians. So right now, if there is an incident with an existing licensed piece of equipment, it requires an FOI to get that information released. Health Canada is looking, I believe, at creating a database of information so that Canadians can more readily access it. Can you comment on those latter 2 areas of focus by Health Canada to improve safety for Canadians?
Yeah, I'll start on it, then Diana will finish. What we found with Health Canada, with everything that was identified in the International Consortium of Interventional Journalism, investigative journalism, excuse me, when they were looking at this, is that 80% of the work that they were indicating needed to be done, Health Canada had already started. So they were well ahead in the process, realizing that there was a need there for all the things you're talking about. And Diana, you have some of the specifics.
Yeah, I mean, actually, to your point about the searchable database, that went online just at the end of last month, which was actually much sooner than predicted in the action plan, which had quoted December of this year for that to be available. Now, we know that Health Canada have been working on that database for a number of years, and we're really pleased to see that it managed to get brought forward as a result. So that's already in play. With regards to the inspections, that is a concern. Based on what we said earlier, where the number of audits, especially for small businesses, can be very stifling because you're using the same resources that you would be using for your innovative product development as well. We don't know any of the details that are being proposed yet with regards to that. We don't know whether it's more to increase foreign inspections, which is a good thing, or whether it's to increase local inspections, which we're already having a lot of inspections. So there is a grey area there. We don't know what the plan is as yet.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Albus, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for your expertise today, particularly sharing how red tape interferes or can sometimes take valuable time and resources away from the work that you do. I'm going to start first by speaking with Mr. Matterson, Chemistry and Industry Association of Canada. Sir, you've pointed out that there seems to be a bit of confusion as to, who has responsibility for dealing with your industry and protecting the environment. Obviously, there's jurisprudence that has happened over time saying that there is a shared responsibility by the federal and provincial government. Can you give us an example of, let's say, you said there's about $10 billion of investment that's coming in. Can you give us an example in some of these newer investments as to where you would have overlaps between the federal and provincial and perhaps even local government?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to note is where those investments are taking place, and largely in Alberta. And I think one of the reasons is that Alberta continues to have a reputation of not having a lot of the problems with regulatory competitiveness. Ontario has historically had a very large and important chemistry industry. It has not seen very much investment at all for nearly 3 decades. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the Ontario government now being much more focused on that. What happens if they can't make a case with the global investors to put their money into Ontario? The areas, of course, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, and it's not to say that they all go poorly. I gave the example of air quality, but certainly air quality, climate change. Again, now, it depends on every issue that comes up. Workplace regulations for chemical exposures would be another example. Transportation, rail issues. People forget, yes, we have Class 1 railways regulated by the federal government. We also have the provincial railways. They all play important roles in moving products from facility to customers. So there's a wide range. I would say right now, if I was given the opportunity to say what's chronic and very, very concerning for the economic future in our sector is the overlap, duplication, lack of collaboration, and it goes across all levels of government, but on the climate change file.
Okay, can you give us some examples of where you might have, let's say, obviously the national carbon tax, I'm sure, would be something of interest in Ontario. What other things would you have? Because there's costs associated with that. However, there could be other provincial regulations that might make it more difficult to see an investment.
Well, the so-called federal backstop is not as big a concern. I think we can get to the right place. Sectors like us that had big exposure in Ontario, we have to work very quickly after the change of policy in the government, and we're working very closely with officials. We wish they'd take a bit more time so we can get to the right place, but I'm confident that will be there. But it's the realm of other policies. So certainly the Clean Fuel Standard is one that you've heard a little bit about, but I guarantee you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the months to come. We've had formal submissions from provinces such as Ontario and Alberta to the government saying, we don't understand what you're doing. We need to take our time with this. There's a lot of concerns about that policy. We don't see a lot of engagement on that. And again, provinces like British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario already regulate fuels. Federal government has a role too, but what's the correct balance of who should take what role there? Uncertain, and that is a very problematic area. Almost everything on the climate change file, and this was talked about also, the volume and pace of work. So it's not just the regulation, the price on the emitter. Our industry, our member companies, individual companies probably have 7 different initiatives underway. Emissions from cogeneration, federal and provincial. Emissions on boilers, federal and provincial. Oh, it's not just climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, it's also air quality emissions. And what you're doing to reduce emissions on greenhouse gases could drive up your air quality. Are these 2 groups of people talking to each other across government and governments? The answer is no. So even within a department, are the air quality people talking to the climate change people? No. Are the federal people talking to the provincial people? No. And that creates a lot of confusion and time. And it's not just the gentleman to my right spoke about the costs, paying fees. But when you get involved in processes like this, you're talking about very high costs to the companies involved as well. And Mr. Massey, just to share one example for you in our sector that would be similar. We have a distributor, a chemical distributor, that has said to a very large client, hey, when are you going to bring those biocides to Canada? As we now have all these water-based paints, you have to use a lot more biocides in them. You don't have that problem with solvents. They have a new product. One of the large companies in the U.S. has a new product. It's environmentally friendly. It's a better product for everybody. And the company in question said, we'll never bring that to Canada. Why? And they said, because it's going to take 7 years, and it's going to cost us way too much money to do. And by the way, if we just blend it into the paints and coatings in the United States, where we're already allowed to do it, we'll just ship those paints and coatings into Canada with that product already in them. And so all you've done is disadvantage the Canadian producers of paints and coatings, and you've not got any benefit protection of the public or the environment. So those are the examples where we just say, please take your time, think about the reality of what you're doing, and listen to the good advice from the people that are really affected.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. We're going to move to Mr. Johari. You have 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimonies. I'm going to start with Mr. Goodman. Mr. Goodman, you mentioned at the outset of your remarks, you mentioned compliance audit, and you highlighted that Canadian companies go through the audit with Canada Health, and the foreign entities are now audited by the foreign regulators, and that brings puts both companies in equal level. Can you expand on that one? I just want to make sure I understood it correctly.
Well, the majority of the surveillance is done by of foreign companies is done by foreign health authorities. You know, because Health Canada doesn't have the resources to go around to all the countries where the products are made and do their inspections themselves.
Does that mean that we easily accept their certification and bring the products to Canada, whereas Canada Health standards is much higher? And so,
well, there's a number of agreements of mutually recognizing other health authorities' inspections. But when it comes down to seeing how severely are the other people, are all the Health Canada questions being asked of the concern by the foreign health authorities who are doing it the same that they're asking Canadians? I don't think that's the case.
okay. So
And
would
that's
that-
the part where if Health Canada is going to be very concerned about one issue and come to us where we're producing in Canada and make us expend a lot more to remain compliant, it's only fair if Health Canada would expect the same foreign companies to follow that same practice. And that's the part where the difference
one would
is.
say our standard is higher, and their standard may or may not be at the same level as ours. Yet through the free trade agreements, now these products are allowed to come to Canada, and
Correct, and I mean, the example that Mr. Masterson said also applies in some cases to pharmaceuticals and the treatment of excipients or other products that are incorporated in the products. You know, if we do it here, we have to go through a rigorous pedigree and an audit of, and the other side will probably not look to see if the other foreign companies are doing the same thing. That brings up a lot of cost to us and a disincentive to produce the products in Canada.
okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Proud next. You talked about the consistent application of the policies. Specifically, one of the solutions you suggested was sectoral education. Can you expand on that one vis-a-vis the small businesses and the fact that they may not have the ability or the time to be able to do this? How this sectoral education is going to help?
Well, I think it's so important for the people who actually regulate industry to understand what the industry does and how it works. And we find more and more frequently that while there may be people within departments who have regulatory expertise, they don't actually understand the industries that they're regulating at all. And we've run into that problem where, in theory, what the government is trying to do may make a lot of sense, but in practice, it's just disastrous.
Since they don't understand the industry, is it like how it operates? What is it like? What are the, I don't know, SWOT analysis within the industry? What are the constraints? What is it that they need to understand?
I'll use a great example of a regulatory initiative we've recently been through where we have been asked to relabel all of the products in Canada, all of the consumer health products in Canada. And it's a lack of understanding of how we actually package products led to the case now where our companies are having to make completely made in Canada solutions on their packaging that don't exist anywhere else in the world because we can't fit the information on our existing packaging. And just a basic understanding of how decisions are made, the global supply chain, that it's not just up to the Canadian company to decide, okay, well, I'll just change all of my packaging. It doesn't work that way. It's the global companies who make some of those decisions, and as a result, we may not even be able to bring those products to Canada anymore. And it's one of the reasons why at CHB Canada, we broke down everything we do in business, from research all the way to post-market surveillance, and created these modules where we invited the Health Canada officials to understand a little bit about how we do things, how decisions are made, how we bring products to market, what it takes to get a product on the market. When a decision is made to change a product formulation or product packaging, why is it that industry says we need 2 years or 5 years to make this change, when in the government's mind it should be really easy? You change your packaging all the time. Why can't you just change this in a year? Well, we have to explain why it is we can't change things in a year. And that's where I think it's really important that if I'm a regulator and the regulation, for instance, is going to look at labeling of products, I should be required to understand first how products are labeled. So we've invited, and thankfully Health Canada has taken us up on it, we invited them to our packaging companies to stand there and see how it works, and to get a better understanding, so that when they're working on the details, they're able to understand why we have concerns. Otherwise, they're really operating in a vacuum, and then not being able to understand how their decisions are affecting big business and small businesses.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Albus, back to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to Mr. Manderson. Just to be clear, there's a number of new regulatory provisions that are coming out. You've mentioned one from Health Canada in terms of workplace safety and how that may conflict with provincial matters. Can you explain that just a little bit further?
Yeah,
What's being proposed?
Through the Chemicals Management Plan, which again has been around since CEPA 99 and really reinforced in 2006, there's broad agreement that the federal government's role is to assess new substances and existing substances and identify those that pose unacceptable risks to human health or the environment. Largely, the federal government will take action in certain areas, but when it comes to the workplace legislation is regulated by provincial departments of health and labor. And it's comprehensive. There's training, there's signage, there's personal protective equipment, there have robust and lengthy sets of occupational exposure limits that are strictly enforced with auditors, enforcement agents visiting sites all the time. And again, so when we're talking with the federal government now that they perceive the need for a new role for the federal government to somehow also play a role in managing those risks, our basic question is, what are the gaps you're trying to fill? Where's the evidence that those gaps are there? Have the provinces agreed with you? Because we see a scenario where suddenly not only do we have to meet the requirements of the provinces, but also something from the federal government. And I go back to your earlier question. Can you imagine a year ago when Ontario was also working on the climate change file on the federal government, both levels of government put out requirements on how to regulate emissions from cogeneration equipment. And the federal government's their proposal came out somewhat out of the blue about a week after the provincial requirements had been tabled. They didn't line up. In fact, they conflicted with each other. The federal governments would prevent you from meeting the provincial requirements. And our simple question was, what? Have you guys not talked to each other about this? Like, if you're going to do something and you know the provinces are already doing it, can't you talk to each other? No. So, I mean, I'm trying to say this again, it's a chronic, daily thing. And it's not that any one level of government's right or wrong. It's just that if we're serious in Canada about addressing the issues of regulatory competitiveness, we're in a very different structure than the United States, where roles are often much clearer. We understand there's vagueness, there's uncertainty, so that encourages us to have much more detailed conversations at the start about what the proper roles are for different levels of government. And I would say again, the directive on regulation is a very good document, but if you read that, you will not see the word provinces and you will not see the word jurisdiction in there anywhere. There's an assumption from the first page that the action that is being proposed is a legitimate action for the federal government. And we would say you need to go back to the very conversations that were had through program review that asked one very direct question: is it a federal role?
I've spoken to the CEO in my province who has found an identical situation. And again, the question is, we're fine to have a process, but, who ultimately should be responsible for this? And I think that's very important to be heard. Mr. Lewis, you had mentioned, and I just have to state for the record, I'm against red tape. But when I hear you say, look, there's these audits that are happening and the timing of audits, I will say that from speaking to regulators, sometimes they will say, if there is an issue, we will go in because there is a concern or a complaint. And even if there is not an issue and these things are mandated over a period of checks, over a period of time, it's to make sure that the company that is doing business in this particular area, and I would say healthcare is probably one of the most important areas, very mature industry, they want to make sure that paperwork is being maintained in a proper way, so that if there is a problem, that that does not a company has all the records it needs to be able to engage meaningfully if something goes wrong. So what do you say with that? Is this a case where a small business, maybe you can give us some more particulars as to that, because I want to make sure that the public interest is maintained.
Absolutely. So the idea that an audit must be conducted, that's a quality audit to make sure that patient safety and quality standards are being met, we absolutely agree with. That the auditing process has to be efficient. It has to make sure it gets to expose what needs to be exposed, and that those issues are dealt with if there are any issues. But in this particular case, what we're talking about, it's two different pathways within Health Canada, or whatever, in terms of the audits. The MDSAP audit, which is a very, very extensive audit, is conducted, and then out of a bit of a different department or division, the MDEL audit comes along and is doing relatively most of the things that the MDSAP audit. It's a repetitive component to it, and that's what doesn't make sense.
So Mr. Matterson originally said, aren't these people talking? You're talking about the same department. And so they're actually overlapping the same materials.
Want to go a little bit more specific for us?
Just the department that's responsible for the medical device establishment license is one department, whereas the MDSAP quality audit system is under the Medical Devices Bureau, as opposed to the inspectorate. And so there are two departments. We're currently working on a proposal to bring to Health Canada to show them how similar these audits are, and to see whether there's a way that it can realistically be addressed. So we're in the process of pulling that together.
It's gobsmacking to me that we have these. I can understand Mr. Matterson's concern between governments, because governments don't always communicate well. Cooperative federalism, we would hope that wouldn't happen. But within the same Health Canada, that's unconscionable.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Ms. Cesar Chauvin. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It really is nice, because this was my past life working in clinical trials and pharmaceuticals, so it feels good to return to a really nice, comfortable area. I just want to pick up on Mr. Albus's last point. I think it's rare that we may agree on something, but I tend to want to agree with him on the MDSAP and MDEL frequency of audits and the overlap between them. So between those two audits, how far would you say between? Is it months? Is it days? Is it years between those two audits, would you say? In your past, in your historical context, has that happened?
So the MDSAP audit is a regular audit. People are having annual audits as part of the MDSAP program. The MDEL is probably only, depending on whether you're a manufacturer or an importer and distributor, it will be sort of 2 to 4 year cycles. So you've got 2 cycles going, but when the 2 coincide and we're within 3 months, and you're essentially looking at the same elements that are being audited, There's very little difference. It's more the scope of the product that changes.
And so could you give me a sense, or could you give Canadians who are watching a sense of what an audit means? So I know what an audit was like when we ran clinical trials. All operations stop, the auditor's in there for days going through everything, and you're just kind of sitting around waiting for them to leave. Is this what is happening in your operations?
Well, it's a bit more active than that. For the MDSAP audit, the inspectors will go out into the warehouse and pull product. They will verify that those products are labeled according to the regulations and manufactured according to the regulations. If it's the actual manufacturer that's being audited, it's a very in-depth. It's looking at the design history file of the product to make sure that all the changes are appropriately documented and the appropriate evidence is all part of the file. So it's very extensive.
I'm going to bring up the next question, and I think it might go to Mr. Goodman and your colleagues. A constituent in Whitby came to me within the last couple months talking about Valsartan and that recall. And you talked about equalizing or normalizing the playing field for compliance audits. This is clearly a case where in another jurisdiction, we have a product that clearly was a carcinogen that has now entered into the Canadian market. Can you explain again, or to re-emphasize some of why it is so necessary to have that compliance to level the playing field? And when you ask for a level playing field, are you asking for increase of Canadian audits in other jurisdictions, or are you asking for a decrease in the number of audits that happen on this side?
We're looking not to decrease what we have. I mean, truth is, it would make life easier if we did have you, but that wouldn't, I think, be in the public good. I think we're saying that we think that the amount of and the severity and the depth of an audit on an outsider should be the same as you'd be on an insider in Canada. I don't, again, this Valsartan case is a particular one. There was nobody producing Valsartan in Canada at the time. The market had gotten all consolidated to two players, and they made some changes that were overlooked by the Chinese health authorities and overlooked by a lot of other people who visited them. It could happen again. So again, but if somebody was to make Valsartan in Canada, you would say they should have their process controlled the same way, audited the same way, and look at all the other parameters that could cause this type of defect in the product to be created.
So I'm just going to stay with you for a moment. I also wanted to talk about the submission fees and the case for the pediatric submissions. When I think about the exorbitant costs associated with bringing pediatric medications to a Canadian market, I'm looking at the safety and compliance side. So the safety for my children, if I could be selfish and talk in that realm, and the compliance of them taking their medication should outweigh, that should be the principal focus. Are you saying through your testimony that you may feel that is not the principal focus, and the economics are interfering with looking at the safety and compliance of ensuring that children across Canada have access to the medications that are in the right quantities for them?
No, I'm not saying what you're saying. First of all, I think what the problem is that, and this is not coming from us, this is coming from the head of pharmacy of the Saint Justine, this is coming from pediatricians, it's coming from pharmacists across the country, that when they adapt a product, they compound it. It's not the same quality as a product that is made commercially.
So the quality of the product from a physical perspective is so much greater when it's registered and developed commercially than when it is adapted on an ad hoc basis for a patient, whether it's done in a hospital or it's done in a community pharmacy.
What I'm saying is, so that should be the primary consideration.
That's right, and we're saying, similar to the incentives, if there is a need for this for the population, Health Canada should look around, how do they make these things more accessible? Maybe it's to give incentives, so if you do develop it, you have some exclusivity, like we talked about on OTC and new indications, and create the climate. Don't create disincentives. And a big part of
small market.
That's correct. And again, the big issue is one of this topic is about innovation. So you come and you have people coming to you and telling you they have a problem. Always the mother of an invention is knowing that there's a problem and an unmet need. How do we make sure that those unmet needs end up being products that are developed in Canada that then can be exported elsewhere? We have the capacity to do so, but if we tax all the inventive processes so high, those products won't be developed in Canada, they'll be developed somewhere else. So
Thank
we
you.
deny, and for me, that's the real crux of the matter.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time for 2 more sets of questions, so we're going to jump to Mr. Albus. You've got 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Just a quick question for Mr. Goodman. Mr. Goodman, you'd mentioned earlier that the compounding has extra costs, and in a response to Mr. Lloyd, you also mentioned that the special access program, ultimately it's the person that pays for it because their insurance won't pay for it. So just a quick question, who pays for the compounding in cases of where you might have a child that just cannot digest the regular product and needs to have it further compounded? Would that be picked up by the family, or would that be picked up by an insurance program?
Well, I guess there are really two different things. Special access products are for products that aren't approved for sale in Canada. Compounding is a way to adapt something that is approved for somebody else. So who pays for the compounding? Depends by province, depends by the person's plan. It could be done by the pharmacist. It could be paid for by the formulary in that province or the patient. Special access products, they're not paid for that way.
Okay. No, just wanted to get a sense, though, is that, are we driving further costs up for a particular family who's just trying to access medicine in a way that is, sustainable to their child's health? So appreciate that. Mr. Madison, you also mentioned the fuel standards and how that would have a extreme detrimental effect to both the provinces that have significant opportunities for your industry, but also the industry or the companies themselves. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, there's one thing to say there's a price on emissions, and you have opportunities through process changes, product changes, energy efficiency to try to meet that. What's being proposed for the clean fuel standard is that the fuels themselves will have to have a carbon content. So renewable natural gas, renewable propane. What is that and how much does it cost? Well, I don't want to disparage my colleagues in the upstream energy industry, but at the end of the day, they probably don't care because they're going to have to make a product that meets those requirements and put it in the marketplace, and everybody else is going to have to absorb those costs. And when we've met, certainly with the federal government on that particular policy, we've expressed the concern that the potential cost to us will be dramatically above the up to $50 a ton that we're soon going to see. And what we were especially concerned about, back to good regulatory governance and what looks good, when they started down the road at ECCC to implement or to develop this clean fuel standard, the one thing everybody in the industry asked for is, where's the economic analysis? And they said, well, we're going to let a contract. That'll start in 2019. We'll get the analysis, and it ought to be done in a couple of years. And it's like, but you're proposing to regulate us today. How can we wait 2 years for the economic analysis? I give them credit. They've upped that a little bit. They've moved a little faster. But I don't think you would have one stakeholder from anyone in the energy consuming sector that would come before you and say they're comfortable that that's a well thought out instrument that will achieve its objectives without significantly harming the economy. And that ought to be a test back to the regulatory directive, that ought to be a test. And so when I made my comment that great document, we're not seeing a zeal to implement it, that would be one of the first instruments we'd encourage Treasury to look at that instrument very carefully and assure themselves that it meets the tests that they put in that directive.
Some more time? Okay. So just in regards to the Treasury Board cost-benefit analysis from here, usually that has to be all done as one part of process. Are you saying that they're literally going ahead with a fuel standard consultation without having actually done any of the economic analysis to see what it would cost the industry?
Saying when the process started, that was clearly absent, and there's been some effort to address that.
Is there any, obviously competitiveness is critical because we are competing with the United States for these kinds of investments. Is there anything like that in the United States?
No. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Didn't hear the answer to that question.
No.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Bayless. You have the last. Are you
I'll
sharing
spend a
your
bit of my time with Mr.
Okay.
Oliver.
Go ahead.
Ms. Proud, you have a unique perspective. If I understand, you work for the regulator,
I did at one point, yes.
and now you are subject to the regulator.
Yes.
And you touched on an interesting point about packaging and how that's not something that's done as simple as that. And I know you've had problems in your industry, even something with a lip balm and the amount of packaging you've got to try and squeeze on that. What are the lessons that you could tell us between what you knew as a regulator and now what you knew as working for a regulated industry that we should try and help our regulators? What did you not know that you learned, and how should we make sure that our regulators that are there now are better, or how could we help them?
Well, certainly the first point I touched on is essential, is the people regulating need to understand the sector, and they need to take the time before they undertake a regulation to meet with the industry that they're regulating and have those conversations so they actually know what they're talking about.
Treasury Board is asking to have
That is not what Treasury Board is asking, and that's where we see is it's not a requirement of a regulator to actually know the sector at all that they're regulating. And there's only so much you can do through a formal consultation process to actually get that understanding. And I knew that as a regulator myself. I didn't know to the extent I should have the industries that I was responsible for regulating. And so ultimately you end up with much better regulation if the person drafting the regulation or instructing the drafters really understands the sector. And so that needs to be a requirement.
we should put a requirement, and how should we implement that requirement? You need to know more. How do we implement that?
Well, and I think potentially the Canadian School of Public Service has a role to play, perhaps. I've spoken to Neil Bauer over there about potentially being a conduit to bring together industry sectors and regulators to have very sort of focused, detailed education for people working in those specific sectors. I think that is very, very key to get the baseline understanding. I also think certainly following Treasury Board policies and guidelines the way in the spirit that they were put forward is essential as well. And we see that in all cases. We see consultation being done very differently depending on how quickly one is supposed to get the regulations completed. We see cost-benefit analyses not really being done when they are supposed to, and we've heard of cases where they've already moved forward with the regulations and the cost-benefit analysis happens at the end. I've never actually seen a regulatory initiative where they've done a cost-benefit analysis first to see whether or not they should.
Although that's part of Treasury Board's has mandated that, it's not being implemented. Is that?
It's not being implemented to the extent it should be, and to the extent that Treasury Board would expect it to be. And I think there's two reasons for that. I think one is we have regulators who are not as familiar as they should be with all the steps that they should be taking. and we have a Treasury Board that hasn't always had the big stick that they need to use to ensure that departments are following the procedures and guidelines. And I think by supporting Treasury Board more in their challenge function and Treasury Board ministers in sending things back that have not been done correctly is very helpful as well. Because I firmly believe that the policies that the Treasury Board have put forward are excellent policies, and the changes that the Treasury Board has made are really progressive and would make a big difference. I've just not seen in my history, both in and outside of government, a real adherence to those laws. And I think it comes from both a lack of understanding by the regulator of those policies, but also perhaps a lack of commitment to what those policies stand for.
Okay, thank you. Pass it on.
Just want to come back to MEDDIC one more time. So thank you all for your presentations. It's been very insightful. I just want to follow up. So once you get your licensing at the federal level, and I've heard the issues and concerns there, then you need to go out to all the different health technology. I served on OTAC in Ontario for 3-4 years. I know the cumbersome provincial territorial environment. Is there more that could be done to improve uptake and industry adoption of technology or new drugs? Could CADTH be doing more? Is there a federal role in that to coordinate provinces and territories better?
Yeah, one of the things that we see is that when CADTH comes out with a positive recommendation on a new technology or OTAC, it's well done. The review is completed very effectively. But what happens is it gets into the system, and the system doesn't adopt the product because of cost constraints within the hospital. And people tend to look at one or two elements, but it's really a system problem. So even though we get a great recommendation, and there's several examples of it coming out of OTAC where you were, those products get minimal adoption and minimal uptake. One of the things we're looking at when we talk to ISED and other departments in the government is a role for the federal government to champion what's called value-based healthcare, and to actually show examples and to actually help the community, because the change management at the hospital level, it comes down to cash flow. When one budget exists within a hospital or a department in a hospital and the other budget is outside of the hospital, it's that the benefit of a truly valuable solution from a cost perspective is not seen. It will be from a patient perspective. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Well, that takes us to the end of our session today. Thank you for a very enlightening presentation and lots of good questions, lots of good answers. I think it'll feed nicely into our report. So thank you all very much for coming, and we are adjourned for the day.